Hello, my name is Reese Pugachev, and this is the presentation on Sociology 363, topic assignment 3. This is titled A Delusion of Bootstraps, the meticulous integration of meritocracy to deify our modern aristocrats. My apologies in advance. I have a very sweet and adorable kitty in my arms right now, so any audio muck-ups, that's all because of her. um, all right, so in this presentation, I will cover what the cause of high unemployment rates is, or at least one of them, and two consequences of neoliberalism, specifically the measure that employers use under neoliberalism. I chose company loyalty. And then a barrier to getting into social work. I chose mainly education because that's all I know so far. um, and in that vein, um, the programs that are meant to solve that barrier. All right, so first up, we've got unemployment rates, and they are almost entirely a social issue, in my opinion. Um, I won't say all because blanket statements are always trouble. Um, and one of the many social issues are disabilities. Now, according to um, Hughes and Evoke in their article, Elephant in the Room, Poverty and Disability and Employment. Now, this article was mainly centered on United States statistics, but I still thought that the percentages were relevant to Canada because it's much the same. So, according to them, they said that 18% of individuals with disabilities 16 years or older, excluding institutionalized populations, were employed versus 64% of individuals without disabilities. Adults with intellectual, developmental, or severe disabilities are even less likely to be employed. Now, I think that's important numbers to keep in mind because they're enormous. It should never be that high. Um, and there are so many disabled folk that are absolutely willing and able to work, but it's a matter of the obstructions involved in being disabled and a number of things. So, disability more or less equals poverty most of the time, regardless of your circumstances before you got disabled or if you never were abled in the first place. um, you are immediately put on a path to poverty rather than a path to prosperity. And that I find is extremely significant, and I'm going to go into why. So, this path of poverty that you're put on begins the moment it happens, the moment you're out of a hospital. And in America, it starts even before then because hospital costs are bananas down there. Um, so, first of all, there's going to be a little while where you can't work because you're still healing, or for those of us who've been disabled this entire time, we're waiting on diagnosis. We're looking for doctors that will listen. We're just trying to live in a meantime, sort of like a limbo, if you will. Um, and never mind that, but even if you do get diagnosed, even if you get diagnosed, it doesn't seem to matter how severe your disability is. Applying for any kind of welfare or income benefit of any kind while you're, dealing with your disability, whatever it might be, it's common knowledge within the disabled community that once you apply to like disability benefits of any kind, you're probably going to have to apply quite a few more times. You're going to have to appeal their decisions multiple times, and it doesn't seem to matter if you've lost all your limbs or if you have, like, they seem to not really care how severe your disability is, um, especially if it doesn't impede you physically and it doesn't impede you like mentally in their eyes. Um, Again, it's common knowledge that you not only have to apply multiple times, but once you finally get it, it's not enough. It is way, 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 way below the poverty line. And um, I can get into exact amounts because in Canada, if you manage to get it, and it depends. It depends on whatever, if they're having a good day. Like, I really, it's so subjective. And so you might get anywhere from $200 to $900 a month. And if you've been living in our society for a while, you might realize that that's not enough for anything. And remember, if you're disabled, you're probably paying for medications or physio or additional tools and services that you might need. Like, God's forbid, it's a wheelchair, and that costs like upwards of 20 grand. And that's cheap. Hi, my love. And so there's right at the beginning, you're asked if you're disabled enough. And at that point, you wonder if you even have to bother applying to disability benefits, if it's like if you just have to keep arguing with the government to be like, no, this actually impedes me. And though I would love to be able to work, nobody's hiring me. And that's another thing we'll get into. So, on top of expense upon expense and handling your disability in whatever way you can, like Hughes and Evoke say, poverty is not just a lack of money, it is a cumulative series of barriers to well being and economic independence. And frankly, that's extremely difficult, and thanks, I hate it. Right, but for now, let's move on. So, two consequences of neoliberalism. So, first, we're going to talk about what kind of measures employers adopt under neoliberalism. And I chose company loyalty. Do you like my rainbow? I worked very hard on it. Some of the strategies they use is offering more than just a job. You offer a career path, and this is strategies listed by Kumar and Shikar in Perspectives Envisaging Employee Loyalty. So, continuing on, another strategy that they use is empowering employees by giving them a place to communicate their ideas and influence company practices. And another one is challenging your employees by giving them high expectations that they can meet and then feel good about. And not all of these work out. So, all of these strategies are, in my experience, entirely on paper. Um, in every interview, I see at least strategy 1 and 2. Um, 3 usually doesn't come around until you're hired. But strategy 1 is discussed, and often they offer, you'll start in this position, and if you work with us long enough, or if you meet such and such goals and you really do well, you can earn even more, and who knows, maybe we'll be looking for a manager at some point. So keep that in mind. And that's one that I get a lot, especially because my resume is what they call overqualified. So I have way too much experience in retail. So what I should be doing is applying to a managerial position. And when I'm not doing that, it scares them. So they like to be like, oh, we're looking for a management position or an assistant management position at this and this location. And, keep that in mind for when, if you hire you, there's always a path for you in our company. So there's always mobility, which of course never actually happens, which I've discussed in previous presentations. And then comes strategy 2, which is my personal favorite. I Before this job that I'm going to talk about, this kind of communication didn't exist. Um, you either were liked by your boss or you weren't, and that was that. It was a much smaller environment, um, and the job that I'm talking about was unionized. So, again, on paper, it was very important for them to uh, discuss, what employees thought, no matter how low on the rung you were and such. And a lot of the time they would have, mandatory employee meetings where, you had to come. But the problem with that was that if you're a cashier and you're on the clock, you're not allowed to leave your till. So how are you supposed to go to these meetings that happen like in the middle of the afternoon, in the middle of your shift? There's like, why? Why would you like suddenly stop everything in the store to go to these meetings? Like, no matter how much you have to say. And even if you do decide to go to your boss or supervisor or go to their manager and discuss any issue or even ideas that you might want to influence company practices. You can talk all you want and they'll pretend to listen, sure. But you're not going to do anything. There's no way unless like all 50 of you walk out at once, and even then they'll just fire all of you and replace you tomorrow. It's um though they might, again, have it written on posters everywhere. They emphasize it in your interview and when in your training. They say, oh, your opinion is really valued. So if you have anything to say, just let us know. We're happy to help and such. Um, and then challenging employees, um, that has a tendency to fall short because they might give you high expectations and you might want to meet them. So you maybe take all the shifts that you are not always like the on-call shifts. You might take up on those and maybe you're making a pretty penny for a little while. And maybe you met such and such sales goal for a whole month or a couple of months, or you made the whole goal for the year, or what have you. No one's going to congratulate you. The only thing that happens is you don't get lectured because you did something wrong or you didn't meet those sales goals. That's the only real, I don't know, reward that you get for meeting high expectations. I don't know why they bother, but it's part of work culture to set these high expectations and expect each and every one of your employees to overwork themselves, then not thank them for it, and then, that upwards mobility that they keep talking about, it doesn't happen either, no matter how hard you work at your job. There's no way you're going to be promoted based on your work performance. The only exception I can think of to this is in some companies, like Safeway, for example, the longer you work there, the higher your wages. And it's not much. I think it's like, I don't know, 10 cents per year or something like that. It's not very much. It must be higher than that. I really don't remember though. But you do get a wage increase every 4 or 6 months or something like that, I think. Um, it's to encourage you to stay, right? But it's not significant at all. Um, and more often than not, they'll cut your hours if they decide that they're paying you too much. So that definitely happens a lot. What is nice though is that if you quit or you move or you just step away from Safeway at some point and then you come back, those you'll start where you left off. You won't have to start again with your the time that you put into being employed by them, which I think is kind of cool. But again, it's not very much. So, what are the consequences of company loyalty? Well, if you really adhere to all of these things and you really believe everything they tell you, um, you're going to get burned out. And I can say this from beyond a retail perspectives. Not only are like retail workers, you're offered shifts or you're called in or anything, and you take every single one of those. Um, you're going to get burned out pretty fast, especially because they don't care when those hours are. So um, I remember a friend of mine worked at IKEA and they had um, a new term for when you closed uh, one shift, you closed the store down. And I think at the time that was like 11 o'clock. And then you would open the store the next day. which would be like 7, 8 a.m. And they called it a clopin. So you close and you open. So that's horrendous. And they have no mind of that. They very rarely will, like, if you're taking all of those shifts, you have to not care about what hours they are, how much or how little, and when. Um, and there'll be even times where you're working split shifts, which is when you uh, work a few hours and then, like, that might be um, like 5 hours or so, and then there might be like a 3 hour gap, and then you're working again. That can happen quite often, and that's also very exhausting. And beyond retail, there's also times where you feel uh, committed not just to the company, but to your boss and to your coworkers. And you feel that you have to finish a project. Maybe there's a due date and it's coming up soon, and you feel that you need to do it now. So you put in overtime, or maybe they don't let you have overtime. So you try to bring the project home, um, et cetera, et cetera. Burnout can look like all kinds of things, and it's different for everyone, as some people are keen on, being totally fine with picking up shifts whenever, and some people, like me, are not. Um, and in some cases, you have to take into account stuff like public transportation, and how accessible that is. And let's get not started on public transportation and being disabled all at the same time. And another consequence is that you can be stuck in your job, and it might not be a healthy job. So maybe you are burnt out. Maybe you are absolutely exhausted every time you come in. Maybe you're overworking yourself and all you can think about is work, 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 work. But you're staying because of the benefits, like insurance benefits, or maybe you like that there's a union and you feel like you're being treated like a human for once, and you're not just a number. Maybe you really like the people that you work with, and you know that that doesn't happen very often, so you don't want to leave it. Um, and you get, again, locked in your job, even though maybe it's a toxic environment, or you're burned out, or they're not paying you enough to live, or they're not giving you enough hours, et cetera, and you just can't leave because, or like right now, maybe it's the only job you can get because there's a pandemic out there and it's difficult to get jobs. Or maybe it's close by and public transportation isn't very accessible to you, so you need something that's close to your home, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just being loyal to a company, it's also being loyal to what that employer gives you. So that's, of course, what inspires loyalty. And if you want to know more about what inspires loyalty, by all means, go read that paper by Kumar and Shakar. So moving on, a barrier to social work, and continuing on with disabilities, because I have only thus experienced the education part of social work. I know that regardless of which path you take, whether you want a full bachelor's degree or just a diploma in social work, education is still going to be a part of your path. And if you have disabilities, education can be a pretty tough challenge, especially post secondary. So, this quote is from Crawshaw in disabled people's access to social work education, ways and means of promoting environmental change. So, disabled students work to the same academic requirements as non disabled students. And I understand where they're coming from with that statement. Um, the Red Deer Polytechnic has it on their website under accessibility services that, the requirements, the standards for disabled students and abled students are the same. And that's coming from a place where you're thinking, you don't want to be unfair to the abled students by making the standards lower, or and you don't want to demean disabled people by lowering standards because you want both sections to be just as qualified, right? That makes sense. Fine. However, a number of factors may mean that the time that some disabled students have to devote to studying and to accessing learning materials is greater than for their non-disabled peers, and applies to both university and placement sites. So, Crawshaw is talking specifically about time, and that's fair because um, uh, for some disabled folks, studying may take a lot more time. Um, I, for example, have to schedule everything in advance. Um, I have to take the course outline and all of the due dates, and I'm sure you remember my email. Um, I have to take every single one of those dates and write them out and schedule out and figure out how much time it will take me to complete so and so and this and that, um, especially in regards to writing, um, because it can take me forever, like up to 8 hours just to finish like an email or like an introductory paragraph in an essay. It's a lot more difficult, and it just takes more time. And that's to say nothing about studying. And reading can be difficult for some neurodivergent folks. So, time is a huge factor um, in education, and that can, of course, be an issue. And of course, you still want, your students to be done sections at a specific time because you've got a schedule too, right? And you need to be able to know that you're done teaching chapters 1 through 5, and now we're moving on to chapters 6 through 8 or something like that. Like you need that schedule in there, and you need to know that your students are caught up with you, for the most part, at least you hope. Um, be that through midterms or essays, or the journal reflection discussion posts, what have you, or class attendance. um, so for someone who maybe that some of those assignments take more time, it might be difficult because you have to also take into account teaching methods and the teacher's time, and you only have 4 months to teach this entire textbook. So like, how do you factor that in with disabled students? And it's difficult. It's a difficult problem. So I do get that, the standards have to be the same, and you can't necessarily lower one for the other or vice versa. So, speaking of Red Deer Polytechnic, I wanted to look into accessibility services, and specifically at the school I'm currently attending. So, for classroom accommodations, um, They've got like lecture recording and access to lecture notes and preferential seating and like listening devices or translations or um, a laptop if you need it, because some professors don't like technology in their classroom, so some students need to have that privilege, um, or access to assistive technology. And exam accommodations include extended time for exams, um, distraction reduced environments, breaks during the exam, and again, more adaptive technology or software. And of course, assistive technology, which could be like text to voice or larger font or a number of things. um, so, are these services really effective? And I will say that yes, they are, um, but they are not necessarily enough. Um, and the problem is mainly that not all disabilities are the same. And in addition, not every disability is fixed, even just for an individual. It depends on context, it depends on teaching methods, it depends on time management and how their disability combats time management, because you can have periods where you're completely fine and you're acing every assignment, and then maybe that ends in like a couple weeks. And like, what are you supposed to do, right? So, like, again, disabilities are really hard to define. So, with that in mind, how do you get diagnosed for something that's so, for want of a better term, wishy washy? Um, so it's difficult if you haven't been able to figure it out. And not everyone is as aware, perhaps, of their shortcomings as some other folk are. I admit that I'm lucky enough to have happened upon a system that works for me. Um, and I'm lucky enough to have a professor that's open to alternative formatting for certain assignments. So, like, again, it depends on the professor, some and teaching methods, and like, especially in post-secondary, there's no way that you can control that. And I wouldn't want to, because, you know, different teaching methods is kind of important, in my opinion. It's like to have that diversity, especially because it depends on what subject you're studying. For example, film is extremely visual, right? Obviously. But at the same time, you're also using a visual media to write about, and you're writing quite extensively about it. Um, and then at a certain point, it becomes hands-on. Um, so you're actually working with, machines and technical things and actually moving things around and then learning how to work with people and that sort of thing. So it's like, how are you supposed to fix that? So, like, that there's no way, right? So, in my opinion, it is always important to have everyone be aware of, what's going on inside that noodle of yours, and, and be able to provide solutions, though, again, not everyone is able to do that. Um, so, again, another barrier that might arrive too is that with this inability to really define disability, severe or not, or define what severe disabilities are, and also figuring out what you need from education. How do you learn? Is all an enormous process, and that's something that non-disabled students don't have to go through. They don't have to go to a doctor or a psychiatrist and say, okay, here's my life. Here's, my struggles, and I don't know why, but here those are, and rely on someone else to not only validate them, but to give them a place to at least start in finding a solution to, you know, education and better accessibility there. And above, on top of all of that, is transportation. So, being disabled in any way, um, it doesn't matter, if you can walk or run, it can still be difficult. Um, Public transportation isn't always very accessible because it depends where you live, especially in larger cities. Um, there are food deserts, transportation is just very inaccessible. For example, in Calgary, in the, um, I suppose, less popular neighborhoods, transportation is very difficult to get to. And if it's not difficult to get to, then it still takes a really long time. You can be on a bus and a train for hours before you even get to where you're going. And then you have to stay at that place for X amount of time. Never mind if you have studying to do, assignments to do in the meantime. Sure, you can probably do some of that on the bus, but again, that also really depends on your disability, because some of us might find it difficult to, I don't know, write well on a bus that's, bouncing and vibrating all the time. Um, or type if we have a laptop out, or maybe we're nervous to have such technology out because we don't live in a very, again, popular neighborhood. So we might not want to have that out just in case, etc. So, as much as accessibility services might be attempting to solve the problem, it is not the be all and end all. And the thing with, like, this pandemic, in addition, is really brought to the forefront what health means to a lot of people. So for, it's a lot of disabled folk, we're at high risk. So we can't just go out and risk getting a cold when, even if it's not a virus, maybe that's too risky for us. So we can't really be around other people, or at least out in public too much, or such and such, whatever the case might be. So, anyway, that's my rant. Um, so, these are my resources. So, kind of bringing all of this together with being disabled, and also like neoliberalism in the workforce and economy and such, and how that all comes together. So, disability can lead to poverty, and poverty leads to a lot of inaccessibility, on top of the already inaccessible things that having a disability gets you. Ooh, you get a card. Um, so, access to education might be more difficult, not just financially, but physically or mentally or what have you. So, In addition, there's the problem of our society, our culture, that's pushing a stigma on disabled folks and completely normal people that, is absolutely a delusion, because there's no picking yourself up by your bootstraps. There's no amount of merit that you have that is going to get you anywhere if you're born into a certain financial class. Like, it's pretty rare to be able to move yourself up without sacrificing quite a lot. And especially something like burnout is a huge thing. Like, you're expected to overwork yourself, and in order to get, you know, the crazy, podium of being, rich and famous in your future. As my little tagline in the beginning of the slide implies, it is my opinion that neoliberalism and meritocracy is just another way for the 1% to justify their positions and their unwillingness to give them up, because they'll tell you that no, it's your fault. It's not a social issue. It's your fault that you're unemployed. It's your fault that you're disabled. It's your fault that you can't get into school and get educated so you can get a better job. It's your fault. You're just not good enough. You're not working hard enough. You have to work harder. So, again, it's a delusion. That's not something that happens in reality. And any minority in the world can tell you that. So, I think with that, I will end it here. Thank you so much and have a lovely day.